Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramanian's contention that India's average GDP from 2011 is possibly 4.5% instead of 7% as government statistics show has set the proverbial cat among the pigeons. The Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister has promised a point-by-point rebuttal to Arvind Subramanian's claims, even as the debate rages on whether the new methodology put into place in the NDA regime and conceptualized during the UPA regime has actually overestimated India's growth. So should the government of the day be taking its former chief economic advisor's claims more seriously? To speak on all this and more, I'm joined now by Ashima Goyal, member of the PMEAC, that's the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, and professor at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research. Ms. Goyal, thank you for speaking with us here on the India development debate. I'm going to begin by asking, should the government be dismissing outright the claims by Mr. Subramanian?
I think we cannot rely on or take seriously GDP estimates by any one individual. It has to come from a very robust grassroots process where so many statistical officers and procedures are involved to have any credibility. So I think that moreover, this whole debate on the rebasing and that it has been overestimated since then is overdone because the CSO just moved towards international practices, towards better databases. And since it was a major exercise, there was a period of adjustment required and some changes in the revisions, etc. But that said, I agree with Arvind Subramanian that possibly our potential GDP might have been even higher than what the CSO was telling us, right? It was clear that industry was in a slowdown ever since 2011. Private investment was not growing as much as it had in the previous period, or, at least some, not showing any growth at all. So therefore, I believe that in the inflation targeting period, in any case, the GDP estimates didn't matter that much. Even that time, the TAC, when these new estimates came out, knew that there are signs of slowdown in the economy. So even if the CSO is telling us growth is higher than we thought it was, we still know that growth is less than it could have been, right? So the issue was that the real interest rate was allowed to go too high because all the oil prices crashed and inflation crashed.
Yes.
Policy rates were not adjusted as much, and that did have an impact on economic growth. So while I disagree with Arvind Subramanian's estimates and questioning of the CSO, I agree that possibly macroeconomic, monetary and fiscal also was on an FRBM adjustment path. So possibly macro and monetary policy was too tight in this period, given an obvious slowdown in industry. Yeah.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, ma'am, you are saying that there may have been an overestimation, but you're not agreeing with the 2.5% number. Am I getting that correct?
No, I am saying that we have to rely on the CSO estimates, that the rebasing that they did was based on fundamental conceptual changes which were in line with best international practices, that it was based on using much better data, and that since the economy is undergoing a structural transformation, with this kind of major change, you expect some uncertainty about GDP figures, so that the subsequent revisions made further changes. There was fine-tuning. Okay?
Yes.
And Arvind Subramanian's estimations themselves, there are possibly problems with that because it is just based on, showing that India is an outlier with respect to some other countries. It's based on some indicators and an econometric procedure, which is not sufficient, which is not adequate to estimate the GDP.
Okay.
Yeah? And it's not clear that the countries he's comparing India with have a similar structure. There could be questions about the econometric procedure. right?
Right.
So it is good that it's fine as a debating issue, but it cannot be taken seriously as an estimate of India's GDP.
Okay.
Arvind Subramanian's numbers cannot be taken seriously as an estimate of India's GDP growth.
Okay, absolutely. But I think what has given some weight to the debate and those who are saying why not look at it at all is the variance between the GDP numbers and other high frequency data. For example, automobile purchases or export numbers or other indicators like that, and which has led to people asking that, look, there is some kind of a variance there. So maybe the GDP numbers are not as reflective of what's really going on.
No, but it must be recognized that the economy is undergoing a structural change. There are other, India's growth path has been more service sector driven. So there's higher growth in those areas. Yeah. And a slowdown I'm saying there was a slowdown in manufacturing and in investment. We recognize that. And that needed to have been reversed. And India's growth could have been even higher in this period than it was. But possibly the CSO is measuring some structural changes which led to a higher rate of growth for the Indian economy. Our rates of growth and potential rates of growth were going up in this period. Yeah? So we were performing below our potential. But we were not growing at 4.5, which Arvind is saying. We were growing at whatever the CSO figures are. But we could have grown, if industry had been growing faster, we could have grown even higher.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a completely different perspective, that were we punching below our weight. But the claim here is a serious one, that maybe we didn't know that, as he says, that you're being navigated with a faulty, possibly broken speedometer. And
but Tamanna, see, this period we were following an inflation targeting path.
Yes.
Yeah. So the interest rate was and we were coming from a period of very high inflation. Yeah?
Right.
So the interest rate was based on what was happening to inflation. The growth numbers were not taken into consideration that much. Yeah? And the main problem was, even if you ignore what was happening to growth, even if you look just at inflation and the interest rate that the Reserve Bank set, it was very, very high. The real interest rate was very high after 2014. It was not cut as much as it could have been because inflation crashed with oil prices. Yeah? So the real interest rate was too high and it damped economic growth. We don't need Arvind Subramanian's figures to tell us that policy was misguided, because policy was not paying so much attention to growth rates at that time. It was looking at inflation. But even just looking at inflation, it was too tight. I hope my argument is clear. It is complicated.
No, absolutely. You've actually explained it very well. But I do have a couple of more questions. He says that the largest variance he sees in all of the 17 indicators that Mr. Subramanian picked up was in informal manufacturing. Do you think there is some other explanation for the variance he speaks about?
Well, I've looked at his paper very briefly. I need to read it more carefully. But I think that the bulk of the paper is about picking various indicators and showing that based on that, Indian GDP growth is an outlier compared to other countries. But then he's speculating why GDP growth was underestimated or why it was lower. And there he does not have so much, he has not done much investigation himself. So this informal sector, I don't think he has any data on it. Yeah, he's just saying that possibly informal growth fell and it's not measured. It's just imputed. But that is the other thing. The CSO in moving to this new base improved the surveys on which it was estimating informal sector. It used much better data. Much wider. Like imagine earlier, the industrial growth estimates were based on a sample of 4,000 firms. Now it was 5 lakh firms from the NCA 21 database. So more of the smaller firms were included. And then the economy was going through this increasing formalization and GST, which releases much more data on what is happening. So, I think that the CSO, the changes, if it had not done this rebasing or moved to better databases, we would have been measuring informal sector and the structural changes in the economy much less than we actually did. Yeah.
Do you think there is merit in the suggestion that, of course, Mr. Subramanian has made and now others are making, that at least let's take a look at the current methodology. Let's get an expert committee together full of, independent thinkers and qualified people and just take a look at it. Do you think there's any merit to that suggestion?
I think it's much more important to strengthen the CSO and the committees that support it. Instead of setting up an extra committee, we already have an advisory committee on national account statistics, and it is mandated to have 7 members. It has only 3, and I think a couple resigned. So, you need to really put independent experts with very good credentials on these committees. You need to improve the strength of the CSO. They're doing so many surveys. You need to improve the statistical capabilities at the state level, which are very poor. So given that the economy is much more complex now and is growing, we need to strengthen our statistical agencies. But that said, there are also some changes with greater digitalization, automation, tax, data collection. There are very rich databases now available, which can be processed without manual intervention, which can give, AI and big data. We can get a lot of insights on the economy now. So we need experts in all these areas to join our statistical agency, not just an external set of external experts who come in and, don't know the grassroots and then opine. Yeah, we need people who are integrally involved in the whole process.
One last question, Ms. Goyal. Do you think that these claims will have an impact on the credibility of the statistics that the Indian government produces? Do you think it will have an impact globally at the way we are viewed?
It should not. It should not because I think that the whole debate was politicized before the election. There was a lot of questioning of that the data was sort of, being painted so as to give a different picture of the economy. All those political, that debate should die down now. The elections are over. And this government has to demonstrate that it believes they have said so, and let us give them a chance to show that they want to strengthen institutions and they respect institutions, and institutions really are the backbone of the economy. So India's statistical agencies have been in the forefront. Just when national accounting was set up, we had really distinguished people like Professor Mahalanobis. So we need more. We need such sort of credible people to be associated with the CSO. We need the officers' pay, emoluments, and the kind of experts associated in AI to come to join the national statistical agencies. And I'm sure all this will die down, because all that noise, there was a lot of noise on various political issues which turned out to be incorrect, really election-related propaganda. Now, I think the serious task of building institutions and policy capabilities will continue, and I'm sure as India is doing well, better than many other countries, it will be respected in all areas, including its statistical capabilities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ashima Goyal, for speaking with us. That was actually the first response really to the entire controversy from a member of the PMEAC.
But let me just add that these are my personal views,
absolutely.
Okay? Not those of the AAC.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah?
Ashima Goyal speaking in her personal capacity, but she is a member of the PMEAC, and this does reflect in some part what the council has been saying, that they do not accept the claims of Arvind Subramanian and will put out a point-by-point rebuttal.